what that means, so really what that means is if you kind of look at, there's this misconception that bears often are just marauding about, will come into communities, causing trouble, getting into conflicts. But bears really do want to avoid people and human areas, but can often be drawn into these areas around people or into conflicts with people because they're just looking for easy to access food sources. So a lot of times it's garbage in communities or chicken coops or just easy food sources as they're moving through areas. One good example about what led to this effort is in national parks. Prior to like the early, 50s and 60s, there was actually this, mentality where people would actually feed bears. They had these open garbage dump sites. If anyone remembers, like in Yellowstone National Park back in the 50s and 60s, they actually encouraged people to feed bears. They had these garbage dump sites that bears were coming into and feeding. They'd actually put bleachers around these sites to watch bears come in and get into garbage. People were feeding bears along the roadsides, in campgrounds. And during that time, it led to a lot of conflicts with bears. Bears were coming into campgrounds, getting into tents. They were causing a lot of property damage. And during that time, there was a lot of human injuries as well as some fatalities caused by bears on people. And so the Park Service and bear specialists started to realize, encouraging people to feed bears was not a way that we could coexist with these animals. It was just increasing more conflicts. And so the national park started to move away from that practice, starting in about the 70s, learning from their mistakes. So they started closing down these garbage dump sites. They started replacing all the garbage canisters with bear-resistant garbage canisters and putting laws into place to prevent people from feeding bears. Because of those actions, now we have national parks where we have really good bear populations, a lot of people coming in, and there's relatively few conflicts. So we've learned if we just secure our garbage and manage our attractants, that we really can coexist with bears with relatively few conflicts. We see that in Yellowstone today. A lot of people are able to watch bears. Even in Katmai is one of the best examples. We really have a high policy on securing food, but it allows people and bears to share those same areas with really few conflicts. And so the national parks did a really good job with reducing their conflicts. But what we saw with communities just outside these national parks and in areas with bears is they still had the problem with conflict bears. They still have open dump sites even today where bears are getting into garbage. People have chicken coops and gardens and beehives and things that are bringing bears into conflicts. So what we see with a lot of these gateway communities near national parks is bears are drawn out into those areas, get into food, and a lot of times bear managers would just come, trap the bear, move it back into the national park. But most often that just wasn't successful. The bears would come right back outside of the park, go back to those areas where they were getting easy food sources. And often it's the bears that are destroyed because of this. So in British Columbia, they decided to take on what's called this Bear Smart community effort, where they started working with communities outside national parks to follow similar prevention conflicts. It's a lot more dynamic because in a national park, you can just make a blatant rule or regulation that people are not allowed to feed bears. You can close all those garbage sites. But in communities, it's a lot more dynamic. You have private landowners that have the right to do what they want on their land. You have private businesses. It's just a lot more dynamic, so you can't really make a regulation that completely covers the whole town. So in British Columbia, they made this great program called Bear Smart Community Efforts, where if a community followed similar efforts to reduce conflicts across the whole community, they could be considered a Bear Smart community. So the components to a Bear Smart community, there's a few different steps that communities have to follow to be considered Bear Smart. So initially it takes just like learning and gathering community members, finding out what are the issues, what are the needs of the community so that they can learn how to put a plan in place similar to what national parks did. One of the first steps of a Bear Smart community effort is that they form a local Bear Smart committee. So you get local people from the town to be a part of this committee. You have people that can help make change, like maybe garbage managers on that committee. And then that committee comes together to make a plan for their whole community to address bear-human conflicts. One of the first steps that that committee does a Bear Smart community assessment. Basically just looking at their community. What are the reasons bears are coming into conflict? What are the areas of attractants? Maybe it's a garbage dump that needs secured, garbage throughout the community. Some communities have more farmers or producers that have livestock. So just looking at your community so that you can create a plan that is unique and will address those issues that your community has so that you can reduce conflicts. And then the community basically implements their plan. How are they going to manage those attractants? Are they going to secure their dump site? Are they going to secure the garbage cans at the local park? And so the community just comes together, and it's this just proactive initiative that they work together to reduce conflicts, which is a big deal that it's proactive. It's not like a government's coming in and telling a community, you have to do X, Y, Z, or there's going to be some enforcement. It's really a community-led initiative that helps them proactively make a plan to reduce conflicts. So sorry, that was a lot of wording just about what makes a Bear Smart community effort. But at that time, I was working for the nonprofit organization People and Carnivores, and there wasn't a program like this in the lower 48 states. There was this great example in Canada they were doing. So I ended up approaching the officials in Canada and asking if we could take that Bear Smart community program and adapt it for the United States so we could have a similar pathway that communities could follow to take on these same efforts. So I started working with, it's called the Interagency Grizzly Bear Committee. So basically the committee that is overseeing grizzly bear restoration in Montana, Idaho, and Wyoming. And, brought up this idea that maybe we should have a program that communities could follow, and then we could recognize them as Bear Smart. At the same time, we ended up taking over this nonprofit entity or group that is called Get Bear Smart. So basically, it's just this nonprofit that was working on helping communities that wanted to become Bear Smart. So just helping guide communities to getting materials on how do they create a management plan? What are the different tools that they could find if they want to do this in their own community? We started to connect different communities so they could talk with other communities similar to themselves and just learn lessons on what worked, what didn't work, so that we could help different communities in between Glacier National Park and Yellowstone National Park follow this same program that really had a lot of success on reducing conflicts within communities. So for the past 8 years, I've been very passionately working with the Get Bear Smart. We kind of took over that entity and now run it with People and Carnivores so that communities can kind of take on these efforts. And that's how I ended up getting connected into this project that's going on in Italy. So just some different examples since we brought that effort into the United States. There was a lot of communities that reached out and were very excited about how can they start a Bear Smart community project in their own community. Places right outside of Yellowstone National Park started getting involved, and communities in between those areas. So it's been really amazing to see these communities step forward, volunteers interested in getting efforts growing. And it's been really growing since we brought that idea into the lower 48 states with the Interagency Grizzly Bear Committee. And so how we ended up getting connected with Italy is during this same effort, over in Italy, they're trying to work on efforts to restore the European brown bear. And they also saw this Get Bear Smart community idea and wanted to launch it over there. So they ended up launching this Bear Smart community effort in Greece and Italy. And they needed somebody to come over and provide a peer review on how they were implementing that project, and just to see if they were kind of following the protocol right, and just to provide a peer review. So as a specialist that oversees the Get Bear Smart effort, they asked that I come over and provide a peer review of their efforts. So this last fall in September, I ended up going over and touring the area and the efforts that they have started. And that's what I'm going to be kind of talking about today for the focus. So just briefly, if you're not very familiar, Europe does have brown bears. They're called the Eurasian brown bears, but they are the same species as the brown bears we have here at Katmai in Alaska, as well as in the lower 48 states. So brown bears are one of the most widespread bear in the world out of the 8 bear species. And they used to be once widespread across Europe, but they've been reduced over time, across much of their historical range. And now there's just small remnant populations in different areas from, Romania, Slovenia, Slovakia, even Poland, Turkey, as well as Greece and Italy do have some remnant populations of these brown bears. And so in Italy, they actually have kind of 2 subpopulations of these Eurasian brown bears. In Italy, they actually call them the Marsican brown bear, but again, they are the same species that we have, Ursus arctos. And in Italy, there's 2 subpopulations, one on the northern end of Italy, and then one in the central part of Italy, just east of Rome. Just to talk a little bit about their numbers, they are critically endangered. There's about 100 bears in northern Italy that have actually been reintroduced. So they were completely eliminated from that range, but they ended up taking some bears from Slovenia and reintroducing them into northern Italy. And today there's roughly about 100 bears in that population, so still pretty critically low numbers. And then in central Italy, which is, again, just east of Rome, there's even a smaller population of about 70 Marsican brown bears. But what's unique about the bears in central Italy is they are, kind of pure genetic wise to the bears that historically lived in Italy. So these are not bears that have been reintroduced. So there is a lot of focus on protecting those bears. They do not want to reintroduce bears from other areas because they want to keep that genetic population pure. And so, they're having to take a lot more efforts to ensuring that those bears are all, they're really protected, because reintroduction is not an option for those bears. So, lethal control is not an option. They will not remove a bear lethally if it's getting into conflict. So they really wanted a program to help focus on preventing problems before these bears got into trouble. So just looking at the project area that this project was focused on, is they ended up putting in for a large grant to restore populations. So in Europe, there's this effort called Rewilding Europe. They're trying to rewild a lot of the populations that were historic to Europe, but have been just decimated from a lot of that historical range. And so for brown bears in particular, there's this project where they were focusing on central Italy, which is the area in orange, as well as the areas over in blue in Greece, where there's a remnant population of bears as well. So this LIFE project within Rewilding Europe was focused on conserving these 2 bear populations. And today I'm going to be talking more about that population focused in central Italy. So just here's a map that kind of shows the current range of that central population. So you see Italy to the left, you've got Rome down here, and just east of Rome, this whole orange area is the extent of that Marsican brown bear population. And again, there's about 70 bears as of 2025 was the last population estimate around the Apennines range. So there's a national park there, the National Park of Abruzzo, that has a core area of this population. And what's unique about this national park, unlike some of our national parks, is the national park's actually built around a lot of communities and private lands. So what they needed to find is a program that would help these communities in between the national parks and surrounding it to really provide a more intact corridor for these bears to be able to recover. So this Rewilding Europe ended up having different regions that started up projects. So in this area, it's called Rewilding Apennines. It's a nonprofit organization that is working on rewilding this area, and especially efforts around the Marsican brown bear. And they use the Marsican brown bear as what's called an umbrella species. Basically, if they can protect the Marsican brown bear and its range, it'll end up providing a lot of protections for a lot of other wildlife. Wolves over there, vultures, a lot of critically endangered smaller animals that share the same habitat as this Marsican brown bear. So one of their major efforts is focused on this corridor so that they could start rewilding wild populations in this area. And so Rewilding Apennines ended up having a grant opportunity where they applied for this Life Bear Smart Corridors project, and they ended up getting 2 million euros to launch Bear Smart community efforts in this corridor. And that money and that grant allowed them to start Bear Smart community projects with 16 communities in this corridor, as well as 2 communities over in Greece. So one of the first projects they did, which was kind of like a pilot project, that they started a Bear Smart community effort in this community called Petrano. It's just east of Rome, about an hour and a half. And what you have in Italy is there's a lot of these communities that are up in the foothills that are built up in the mountains. And then they're adjacent to these kind of larger areas that provide really critical bear habitats. So bears are barely just starting to move into these areas as they're recovering, but you have these communities up there that, again, same like our communities used to be and still are. You have people with open garbage dump sites. They have garbage in the community. They have chicken coops, apple orchards. So what's happening is as bears are moving through these areas, they end up getting lured into the community to get these easy to access food sources, and it gets them into conflicts with people. And again, this bear population is so low in numbers that they cannot remove these bears. Removal isn't an option. There's nowhere to relocate them. The habit, especially in Italy, is really developed. So there's not a lot of other places that you can move these bears to. So they started a pilot project in this first community, Petrano, where they worked with the community to follow the Bear Smart community steps. They ended up, securing all their garbage in town. They helped the residents build electric fences to protect their chicken coops. They started doing bear education events, and they followed that Bear Smart community program. And afterwards, they ended up, after just 3 years, reducing their bear conflicts by 99%. They reduced the number of bears getting into conflict, as well as the amount of property damage that was happening in this community. And what they also saw is, since they've done that Bear Smart community effort, the number of bears that are using this corridor now moved from like 1 to 2 bears to now up to 8 bears, that this is part of their home range, including a female with cubs, which is the first female with cubs that has been documented in this area in several decades. So it was really a successful pilot project that led them to apply for this grant to now help 16 communities kind of follow similar steps so that they could enhance these corridors for bears in these areas. So just some examples again of this community. You've got bear habitat surrounding the whole area, but now that this community has secured all their attractants, bears are documented moving through these areas, but they are no longer coming into conflict with people. People are very proud of what they've done to support bear habitat. So it's really been this really great pilot project that has inspired other communities to kind of follow suit. So why is this important? Threats, not only is this bear, like I talked about, this population is just critically endangered. The population is so low that removing these bears that get into trouble is not an option. So really, you've got to focus on preventing these conflicts in the first place. Like a lot of communities we see here in the United States, things that are bringing bears into conflicts are bears are getting into garbage. They're getting into gardens, beehives, orchards. They're getting into chicken coops and livestock, and it ends up creating a bad taste for bears with a lot of the community members. There's road collisions. Bears are getting hit and killed on the road as they're crossing through these communities, crossing the highways to get access to these unnatural foods. There's poaching going on. So it's actually really impacting the population that is already at such a low number. And there's also just a lot of misunderstanding. People like bears on the landscape. It's not like this vindictive mentality that they want to remove bears, but they just don't want the bear in their backyard. They don't want bears causing property damage. They really enjoy bears in the area, but they don't know how to prevent conflicts. They don't know how to build an electric fence where they can find bear-resistant garbage canisters. So a lot of these communities just don't know what to do, and they don't have anyone to help them prevent conflicts. And so that's what was a major focus of this Bear Smart community efforts, is just helping people learn how to coexist with bears, helping them get the tools so that they can implement these efforts in their own communities. And so what they have done so far with this Bear Smart Community Corridor Life project is, like I mentioned, they worked on developing this Bear Smart community efforts in 16 different communities that look a lot like this. They're these mountainous communities helping people prevent conflicts. They ended up getting funding with this grant to install over 500 electric fences. They were able to get bear-resistant garbage canisters for a lot of these communities to replace. They help them secure their chicken coops, gardens, orchards. They help the farmers and ranchers in this area get livestock guardian dogs, which are basically just specific breeds of dogs that have been bred to bond to and protect livestock. And also just helping these communities put on education events, training events for people that are living, working, and recreating in that area so that they know how they can prevent conflicts. And it's really just built an amazing amount of awareness and coexistence on the ground. So again, just going back to these different steps of what makes a Bear Smart community effort and what they ended up doing. So for those 16 communities, with each one, they spent time going in, talking with the different community members, learning what they were interested in, what they needed help with. In each of those 16 communities, they ended up building a Bear Smart community in each of those towns, so that there is a committee in the town that is working on implementing this effort and making sure it continues to go on. They spent time really listening to the concerns of the local people. Then that committee ended up doing an assessment. Each community looked at what was their problems, what needed to be done, and then they created a plan on what they were going to do to reduce conflicts. And the Rewilding Apennines group was able to come in and help each community then implement those different management plans that they wanted to do. So one part of the project was just helping provide people on the ground. You know, they brought in people that would help build all these electric fences, help them put on education events for those communities, help them find funding for these different tools. They created in each of the communities what's called a bear intervention unit, basically a person that you could call that would come help if you have a bear getting into your garden, getting into your chicken coop. That person would go out there, help the person build an electric fence or get whatever resources they need to prevent that conflict, and also work with their neighbors to ensure that that bear was not coming into town and getting into conflict. Again, they help these communities take their regular garbage canisters and secure them with bear-resistant garbage canisters, clean up a lot of their landfills, their park areas with garbage, which has made a big difference in bears coming into town and getting into conflict. They helped people put electric fences around their chicken coops and even develop these bear-resistant chicken coops, which I thought was really interesting. I actually haven't seen that being done so far in the United States, that it was a great idea. I would love to just see more innovations like this. There's a lot of great tools out there to help people coexist with bears so they could still have chickens in bear country, but bears aren't coming in and getting into trouble because they're getting that easy to access food source. Another thing they did in each of these communities was create this Bear Smart Community Info Center. So basically just a office in every one of these communities where a person can walk in and get help with what to do to prevent conflicts. If they needed help with securing their garden or chicken coop, or they needed to know what resources were available in their town, there was a place that they could just walk in and talk to people to get help. I thought that was really unique, that each one of these communities had a really beautiful kind of office area with a lot of resources available to help people. And it really went a long way for people to just have somebody to talk to in these communities. Each community, they developed a series of signs and education information to really be proud that each of these communities are a Bear Smart community. They would put trailhead signs up for people what to do when they're recreating. They ended up doing a lot of just artwork throughout their community. These communities were very proud of the Marsican brown bear, and especially the more they were able to reduce conflicts and coexist with these bears, and seeing the results of what what their efforts did. You could just see a pride in a lot of these communities. They were very excited to share their projects with us and talk to us about how they're preventing conflicts with bears. So when we went over this last fall, we ended up touring all these different communities that were taking on these Bear Smart community efforts. We were very fortunate. We were able to meet with like the mayor of each community, their local offices, their Bear Smart committee, and the members on that committee. We met with local people, farmers, producers, to hear their stories on how they were dealing with bears. And it was really amazing to hear the stories of, before the Bear Smart community effort, they had bears coming in, killing their livestock. They were very scared of bears, where now that they've put these prevention practices into play, they were really excited to talk about bears coming through, being able to see them, but the bears weren't coming into conflict. So they really appreciated those bears on the landscape more now that they had tools in place to make sure there wasn't conflicts or problems. So that's what we ended up doing, is just touring a lot of these communities, seeing those projects, what they had been doing on the ground. And it's really gone a long way to building trust with these communities. It's no longer, the government or the Park Service against the local people. They really were a part of that whole equation to have coexistence. One other unique thing that they did there is they supported the businesses in these communities and tried to really help them build a brand around it. So if a orchard producer who is making apple cider took on prevention efforts to protect bears and secure their crops, they started a business network, so tourists in the area could see who are the businesses that are taking efforts to coexist with bears. So it just was bringing benefits to those communities, where they started to see tourism coming in, buying their products because they were appreciative of the efforts they took to coexist with bears. So they really helped these communities elevate and actually build a profit around, like it's a positive thing to coexist with the bears. So it's really amazing project what this grant was able to do. And it's amazing what you can see for just even one community doing these efforts, how it directly translates to improving coexistence for bears in that area. Last thing to mention, if anyone's interested in kind of seeing a little bit more, there's a great video about this particular project. It's on YouTube. It's called The Central Apennines, A Story of Coexistence. I can drop this link into the chat, or I'm sure Stacy can share it with the group afterwards. It's about a 20-minute video on YouTube, but it's a really great short film that just shows the people that are actually doing this work, the people we worked with, and just showing the landscape, what it looks like, and what these Bear Smart community efforts look like on the ground. So if anyone's interested, I'll be sure to share this link. And the last thing I just like to leave off with, if anyone's interested, what you can do for bears, if you want to learn more about these Bear Smart community efforts, our website is bearsmart.org. It has a lot of great resources. If you have a community that might be interested in starting a project like this, that website has a lot of great resources to help you just learn more information, get started. There's a Bear Smart community network we created, where all these communities that are doing this work, we're trying to just build a network so that they can share, again, lessons learned with each other. If a community has a particular problem or idea that they want to learn for, they have a network of other communities that are going through the same work that they can be able to talk with. We'll host almost monthly or regular meetings between the Bear Smart communities so that they can bounce ideas and questions off of each other. So People and Carnivores is the nonprofit kind of leading a lot of that work. If anyone has any questions about, what they can do to support these efforts, feel free to reach out or check out some of these resources. And with that, I'll stop the presentation and see if folks have questions. Sorry if I went through that fast or went through a lot of it.
I thought that was great. Thank you so much, Ranger Kim. Already we have one question, and it is indeed from one of our international viewers. You guys, if you do have questions, please raise your hand using the symbol down at the bottom, or raise your hand in real life, and Ranger Kim will answer your questions. Leanne, you get to go first.
Hi, thanks for coming to talk to us. I just wondered if there were plans to move the Bear Smart idea to northern Italy as well, or if it's already there after what happened with JJ4, whether there were plans. If there's not, it's sort of needed. I just wondered if you knew at all.
Yeah, so I hope that there is plans to move this effort to northern Italy. I actually talked with one of the specialists last fall after I returned from Italy. Me and Stacy actually were at a bear conflict prevention conference where people from all over the world, like bear specialists that are working on these efforts, got together at a conference. And we actually heard from one of the biologists up in northern Italy, particularly about the growing number of conflicts they're seeing and even human injuries. And so they heard a lot of the presentations that we were talking about, these Bear Smart community efforts. And I spoke with him personally afterwards. And so I hope that they have heard from that and kind of took it as something that they could start. I don't know of any immediate plans, but I know after that conference, they were really interested in what they could do. And then especially seeing an example in their own country. It's easy to look at the United States and go, well, that won't work over in Europe, or that won't work in Italy or here. But it was great for them to actually see this work is being done across the world, and it might just be in small different ways. But I think that was really helpful for Northern Italy to actually see what was being done by their counterparts in the South. So yeah, really good question.
Thanks, Leanne, for asking that. I remember that you asked a similar question when this first came up. So thanks for keeping that alive. And you guys, I forgot to tell you that Ranger Kim did do a presentation at the Human Bear Conflict Conference. Ranger Kim, several of us, I think there were 4 of us from Book Club who were there, and we're privileged to hear you speak. And Bob it was one of those people. Bob, go ahead.
Thanks, Stacey. Kim, my hat's off to you. You've done some amazing work, and I mean, in a young life. So, keep it up. This is terrific. Just a question, actually 2 questions, but they're related. So the 16 communities in central Italy got a grant from the EU for a couple, 2 million euros, I think. Mm-hmm. If, that works out to be, 100 and low change, 1,000 euros per community, which doesn't seem like very much. It seems like they've accomplished a huge amount, though, if that's been the sum total of their budget. Are there still ongoing are they still getting ongoing funding for their projects? And how many more communities are there over and above the 16 in the Bears central Italy range? I mean, are we looking at maybe 200 more communities? Are we looking at 5 more? I mean, how big of a project is it? Is there still to be done over there?
Yeah, really good question. So as far as the funding goes, that grant was for, I believe, like a 4-year time period. So I think there may be 2 or 3 years in. One part of that grant is that they do ask that they get a match for it if possible. So I think it was like they require a 25% match. So say a producer needs $500, they would ask that he put in 25%, and that helps that funding just go a little bit further. Okay. They also have a nonprofit called Save the Bears, Salviamo l'Orsa, that it's a nonprofit that's just helping provide some additional funds if, say, the landowner or that town can't come up with the 25%. But just those nonprofits helping to support that really can help stretch the money. Sometimes there's producers that said, hey, I have funding. I just need a person to show up and show me how to build this fence. So they were able to, save that for a project moving forward, which is great. So that's how a lot of these projects work. Sometimes you got people that, hey, they got the money. Some communities, the first year or so, were hesitant. They weren't sure. So they put the money for the first year, but then the community started to see, hey, this is successful and this is saving us money because the bears aren't causing damage that we now have to replace all these garbage cans. So communities, we see like a pattern of the more they start getting involved, they start taking on a lot of efforts on their own because they see it being successful. And same with like that business effort. They were trying to create these businesses, like to give them an incentive. Hey, you're going to make more money if you can sell this idea that you can come, taste their apples and coexist with bears in an area that they're doing these efforts. So it's really great to see that money stretch a little bit further. With nonprofit conservation work, money is always going to be an issue. And I think that's on the forefront of the organization's mind. Like in 3 years, we're going to run out. What can we do next? So, that's what's great about nonprofits is they do have staff member that are trying to look for, is there going to be another grant opportunity? What was great about that first Bear Smart community project that they did as a pilot is they were able to demonstrate like, hey, we spent X amount and this is what we got out of it. We got more bears, reduced conflicts, and it allowed them to get this grant. And I think if they can prove they were successful, like they did a lot of work with 2 million euros. Like that was amazing. That should help them, I hope, get a grant in the future, because they were able to show we are a group that actually can get this work done. So I do hope that they will be able to have more opportunities. They're hosting the International Bear Conference this September, and they were going to tour a lot of these communities. So I hope that brings even more attention from other communities like in Northern Italy that want to see this or want to say, hey, where can we find a grant? And for a lot of bear people to get together and say, how can we help more communities get funding, or what do they need? And so, it's always an ongoing thing, but I hope with successful projects like this, that it can help them. So that's kind of a roundabout way of like, yeah.
99%, that's a 99% reduction. That's a big number. Wow.
Yeah, exactly.
Well done, Italy. That's you. That's great.
Yeah. And what was the second part of your question? I just dropped it.
That was really it. I mean, how big a project is still ahead of them down there? Is 16? Is it 160 communities? Is it another 20 communities? I mean,
yeah, my best guess is maybe around 50, and I'm just kind of putting that number out. We drove that whole corridor and just seeing the number of communities. One thing they're experiencing in Italy is a lot of younger people are moving to the central, like into Rome, into the bigger cities, that these smaller communities are actually going through a big depopulation. Unlike what we see in the United States, where every community is getting more and more people, over there, we were seeing communities that used to have 5,000 people are now just down to like 300 people. So they're actually losing a lot of people and trying to figure out how can they keep these communities alive. And it was a benefit because they saw that people don't know about bears in Italy. It seems like every time I talk to somebody, they're really surprised to learn outside of Rome that there's places they can go to with the national park to watch bears. I was fortunate enough to see one of the Mexican brown bears in the wild, which just blew me away. I mean, I just had no words. It was like the first time I ever saw a grizzly before, just because I know there's so few. So I hope that allows these smaller towns to really start finding a benefit of, saving the landscape and preserving it, but we'll get some of the benefits from tourists going there. So there is a number of other communities, again, maybe 50, I don't know if it's quite 100, so not a lot. But we're also seeing other communities early on didn't want to be a part of it. They really focused on what are the best 16 communities in between these areas that if we did, would really open a whole corridor for bears to move through. But now communities adjacent are like, hey, why don't we get that? How do we get that started? And so it's all of a sudden creating this, everyone's raising their hand to jump on that. And I hope that helps. And then again, sometimes it might just take a community to figure out getting a little money towards them, but they have some great nonprofits that are really just very supportive of this initiative. And same thing with our Get Bear Smart Society. This has been a passion project of mine because I see how it actually directly just makes things happen on the ground. And I'm so passionate about it. So the Get Bear Smart group is always we actually created a resource, how can communities fund this? We need to get creative. There's grants, sometimes it's a fundraiser. Maybe a school can do a fundraiser. So we're trying to create these examples that can just get other communities starting to generate ideas so that they could do something in their own place. Yeah.
Very impressive. Wow.
Thanks, Bob. Birgit, you're next, and then Lori, and then Leanne.
Hi, I love the idea of all of the empowerment and inclusion and making this actually belong to the communities, because people want to do the right things. They want it to be theirs, and they want it to be their idea, and to have others in the community that they can look to. And I've got a couple, I can see so many other places that could use this. with black bears in Gatlinburg, Tennessee. They could so use this because what they're having there is they've got the maids who go around and they do like all the rental cabins. And and of course they're underpaid, overworked. It's a long way to get back to the office to dump the trash. They got a car full of trash and they see an open dumpster at a construction site and they just toss it all in there. And really, who can blame them if they have a 10-hour day already and they would have to drive another 2 hours? But, just being able to work and solve some of those problems would be great. And then Romania, and I don't know if you've heard of this story, but I read a story in the New York Times about Romania where they're not allowed to do anything about the bears. They're not allowed to touch them. And so they're starting to have a lot of like really bad incidents. I think it's Romania, where people go drive to see the bears and they feed the bears because, that's how you get the bears to come to you. And so then the people in the communities are left with injuries and attacks and real problems there. And I wonder if you've heard anything about that and how on earth would we get to that problem? Because I was just thinking, oh my God, this is such bad publicity for the bears.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. I have heard about what's going on in Romania and I think even parts of Slovenia and some of those areas. And, it's unfortunate because it's like we've learned from our history and hey, we did it back in the day. We encouraged that. And then we realized like feeding bears equals injuries. And when you remove that, Katmai is one of the best examples of like you can have a lot of bears and people with no conflicts, but we have got to manage our attractants, our behavior. And so it's unfortunate, a slow learning process for some other countries that really promote interacting with animals. But one thing I have seen, and I hope I see more, is the bear conference that we went to last fall. There was a lot of talk about this Bear Smart community effort, and so much so that they actually talked about how can we have our own conference on this to get all the bear specialists together to share with the specialists, because there was bear specialists there from Slovenia, from Japan's another area that's going through a period with high human bear injuries. And it reflects bad on the bears. But if you look at the source of that, it's the people. And so the bear specialists, they care and they're like, we need help. What can we do? Where do we begin? And so I think the more we can get together and share some examples on how we can do this, that, just like we were able to turn it around in Yellowstone, it's not impossible. You can do it in a short time span, but it takes working together with people. So I hope the more we have these examples, and I would really like to see some conferences where we can get all these different areas. This applies to anywhere across the world that's dealing with, whether it's brown bears, black bears, anything like that. It really applies. And so I have hope. And like I said, I'm so passionate about this Bear Smart community thing. Even though I'm with the park now, it's just a project that I'm not going to let go because I can see so many communities that could benefit from this. And I love that you brought up Gatlinburg. It is another area that needs it. I have a close friend that's actually the bear specialist down there that started working with a nonprofit because he was tired of being the manager that just had to go remove the bears when he realized it's not that, it's the people. And so I'm going to kind of revisit and see if there's anything with him that he can slowly start over there. He was at the conference as well. And I know he was very interested of like, how do I get started? And I hope that he has started to even hold meetings or start that initial process of like, let's just start talking to people, getting an idea. What is the need? Because it always just starts with one place. And a lot of these towns, sometimes it's slow work where I've just gone in and I'm like, let's just find one person to secure their chicken coop. And all of a sudden the neighbor's like, I want that. And it just starts growing organically. And sometimes it's a slow process, but again, people want this. And the last thing to mention with Gatlinburg is vacation rentals was another area I saw that was one of the number one issues we can see across every place there is with bears, whether it's here in Alaska, down in Montana. I saw that as an issue. I know it's an issue in Gatlinburg. And even in Italy, they have these vacation rentals and Airbnbs that were a big issue. So we ended up creating, with people and carnivores, I created a vacation rental toolkit that anyone that has a vacation rental can actually get this kit that has a flyer on what they can do, where they can find bear cans. It has a magnet they can put on their fridge, a flyer they can put in the Airbnb binder so that visitors can come in and say, oh, I'm in bear habitat. I can't leave my cooler on the front porch. I can't leave the garbage can overflowing on my, when I leave here. And it's started to make a difference. So if anyone's interested in those vacation rental packets, they are on that People and Carnivores website. And we've been sending out, thousands and thousands as we're getting requests from them, because that's one easy thing that a town that's like, hey, can I get 1,000 of those? Because that's one place I can start. I don't know how to get the whole community, but if I can just start with vacation rentals, that's like 30% of the conflicts. So sometimes it's just finding like one area to focus on. And once you get that going, like then pick the next project and the next, and then it comes into, a whole community-wide effort.
Thank you. Thanks, Birgit. Lori and then Leanne.
So in the U.S., why do you think that some people in some communities are so resistant to make changes? And you see this a lot in Black Bear country, and people just don't want to do anything or think the problem isn't them. How do you get to those people?
Yeah. Job security for me, why this work will always continue to go on. It is, people, it's easier to deal with the bears than the people at times. But, we see a number of reasons. One thing I see, some areas, if they don't have a high conflict, or, where I see it, sometimes there's communities with black bears, but not grizzlies. They don't see it as a high priority that they need to change their habits. So sometimes it's slow to get them to change. Other times people like to see the bear. There's this, why should I have to change mentality in the United States, unfortunately, sometimes with people where they're a little bit resistant. One thing I've had a lot of success is working with those people is finding a common ground that I could get them to understand. Sometimes they're going to be a little abrasive when at first you say, hey, you need to secure this for the bear. They just immediately are off guard and defensive and saying, I don't need to change my habit for the bear shouldn't be here, or I don't need to do anything different. But if you actually spend a little time going, like just talking with them and being open without saying you need to do this, but like, just, hey, what's going on? These bears are coming into conflict and we're trying to prevent property damage. One thing I found is a lot of people, if you take it off the bear focus and say, hey, we want to keep your chickens safe, and this will work for all predators, not just bears, they're like, oh, okay, well, in that case, I might be interested, or they don't want to spend money. So it's like, hey, I'm giving away these free fences. You don't have to do anything. We're going to set it up for you. And sometimes I just find like it's like you'll just stop any predators from killing your chickens. This is protecting your investment. It just takes the heat off the bear subject, because I find sometimes people are like, I'm not doing this for the bear. But then all of a sudden, if you can kind of move away from the bear, make them feel less defensive, that can help. Sometimes a little peer pressure from neighbors can help if they hear like, hey, your neighbors are now having concerns with their kids because it's drawing bears into the area. You got to get creative sometimes on finding how you can get projects going. And especially with black bears, it's really tough when you have a lot of people. And if black bears are getting even just a few rewards, it can really be hard to mitigate those conflicts, but not impossible. And if you're interested, like my contact information is open to any of you. If anyone ever wants to say like, hey, I'm dealing with this in this neighborhood, or I'm interested because I care about this other place that I hear about having conflicts, I'd be happy to kind of talk more one-on-one about things that have worked for me. But a lot of times I've made so much progress just sitting down and having coffee with someone and just not even really focusing on the bear initially, just starting to like break down those walls, because people can be really defensive. If you just come in hot and just like, hey, you need to do this. And it's just like, hey, we're a community. We need to keep our stuff protected and other people safe, that it can kind of just open up people a little bit more. I hope that answered your question.
Yes, thank you.
It makes me think of like hikers in the Great Smoky Mountains who are required to have protective food containers at certain points, but they don't want to carry bear canisters because it's too heavy. And then they hear that, well, the bear canister provides a great stool for you to sit on at night after your hike, and it'll keep the mice out of your food in your tent or in the cabin. And so then they're willing to carry the bear canister. It's not for the bear's safety, but it's a stool and it keeps out the mice.
Yes. Real quick, one more thing to add with the Bear Smart community thing. What's nice is it's unique to each community and they can do what they want. So some communities are like, we're not going to make people do stuff. We're going to instead provide education, provide resources, and let the community do that. But I've seen other communities that are like, we're done messing around. We are making a town ordinance and we're going to make people, or we're just going to get rid of garbage cans and they're not going to have an option. So there is like, not to say regulation is the only way, but, or sometimes it just comes from like an HOA. If you can just go to the HOA and say, hey, like there's other reasons. So sometimes you have to just try something. If it doesn't work, go around. But I have seen some HOAs or communities just finally get fed up and they're like, if people won't listen, we're going to do this across the board. And so, yeah.
Excellent. You guys, we have about 5 more minutes left with Ranger Kim. I want to be clear that you can ask her questions about Italy or the Northwestern Plains or anywhere else. And she has said that she will share her contact information, so know that that's coming. If you have other questions, please raise your hands. Leanne, go ahead.
A slightly less cheery question. I'm not sure if it's out of your scope, but I wanted to ask you. But I know that historically there's problems with poison carcasses and the poisoning of birds of prey and other animals. I know that just at the end of April, 18 wolves were poisoned around Abruzzo and the other parks. Was there a plan to tackle those issues where they're stemming from within the Bear Smart? I know it's not a very cheery question, but I wanted to ask it. Sorry.
No, Leanne, I really appreciate you saying that. You know, there was only so many things I could touch on with the Italy project, but one of their big focus efforts was that poisoning, because it's actually one of the leading causes of deaths, especially now that they've reduced so many conflicts between road collisions, and the poisoning is another big effort that they are experiencing a problem with. So part of that grant with the Life Project, they actually did receive funding to start working on that. And, you know, they've had to do a number of things where they got a lot of volunteers to go out, look for those poisoning carcasses. It's really killing off a lot of their vultures that are endangered as well. But it's actually, bears are coming in second to getting into those poisoning carcasses. So they did a widespread education event where they're going into all those Bear Smart community projects and doing a lot of education on what is going on, and also like, hey, we're watching this, and if you get caught, there's going to be steep fines, because these bears are critically endangered. The vultures are. They were doing livestock or just carcass removal. So they just have volunteers going out and looking for carcasses and getting them pulled off the landscape. They're trying to create more just tools for people to go out and get those carcasses removed. As well as just like even building up enforcement around that. I know it is a major issue, but that was actually a big component of the Bear Smart community because it was translating to bear conflicts. Yeah, so thanks for sharing that. Yeah.
Well, thank you for answering. I know it's not very cheery, but I thought I've got to ask it. And I thought, because it's historically happened and recently with the 18 wolves, I thought while you're here, I thought I've got to ask and see if you knew anything. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely.
Glad you asked that question, Leanne. I hadn't heard of that.
Mm-hmm.
Do we have other questions before we turn to the less formal part of our conversation? Are there other questions for Ranger Kim? Birgit, I see your hand raised. Go ahead.
Can't find the little yellow hand, so I'll just use my real hand. So what are you going to be working on at Katmai this year? What are you going to be doing in management?
So I'm part of the bear management team, which if anyone's been to Brooks Camp, a lot of it is just helping, you know, keep people safe from bears, but a lot of times it's keeping the bears out of camp at Brooks Camp to ensure that bears aren't, you know, getting too comfortable around people or buildings. We have an area in camp that we do not allow the bears to linger around. So a lot of times it's just kind of ushering, like Stacey said, with the flags behind the bears to ensure they're not hanging around the cabins and stuff like that. Talking with a lot of visitors to ensure they're being safe. Sometimes you get visitors that hang around too close with bears, or ensuring fishermen aren't, you know, letting bears learn the habit of getting fish. So it's a lot of education, just being available, talking with folks to ensure we can keep, you know, what's great about Brooks Camp that, just people can be around bears with relatively few conflicts. So a lot of it's just based around Brooks Camp. And then we will have opportunities to go out and do bear surveys throughout the park and some of the other areas of the park where we have visitors interacting with bears. So I'll be able to do quite a bit of different things like that, but primarily based at Brooks Camp. So,
Ranger Kim, somebody had asked early on in chat about the orange flags. Do bears recognize orange? Like, is there a difference between would they know if it was an orange flag versus a purple flag? Do you know what I mean? Is the color relevant?
Yes. Yeah, no, that's a great question, actually, because so we have 3 color hues that we see that combine all the colors that we're able to see. Sorry, I'm not explaining that quite right, but bears only have 2. So there is certain colors that actually stand out more to them. And so when we pick out our different tools that we're using with bears, we do make sure to use those brighter colors that we know register a little bit more to bears. So that is a great question, and it does help to make it more bright, more noticeable for bears, but also for people coming through. They definitely notice when the bear managers are kind of running through with that flag. We've used it to wave down people, or even like planes coming in. If there's a bear close to the beach, we can kind of wave to the pilot and get them to go further down the beach or somewhere so they don't disturb that bear. So yeah, so not a silly question at all. So there is good colors with those different flags.
Brilliant. Thanks to whoever asked that question. Bob and then Marley.
Kim, I'm curious, are you familiar with Roger Thompson's book, No Word for Wilderness, Sibley's, Grizzlies, and the Race to Save the Rarest Bears on Earth? What I'm getting at is this was written in 2018, I believe, and I just started it a couple of days ago, and I've been kind of putting it off because I thought it was going to be kind of a negative, just a downer about the problems and all that. But it just sounds to me like what you're doing and what you're reporting on in Italy is things are actually looking better than he portrayed a few years ago. I just wondered if that was, your observation.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. And I'll have to add that to my reading list. I usually try to find every bear book that is out there and read through it. So I will be picking up a copy because I would love to just kind of get a different take on that. So, and then I imagine just, it's not that long ago, but even a few years ago, their population was at about 40 to 50 bears when Rewilding Apennines began working on this project. And
exactly right. His
Yep.
population estimate was 50, and you're saying maybe it's up to 70.
Yeah, as of 2025, they verified 70s. And then again, each of these corridors where the effort started, originally they did a lot of monitoring and counted, maybe 1 to 2 bears, where now they're seeing 8 bears using these regularly, and then including females with cubs. So to me, that is a lot of hope. And sometimes I relate to, it's a little disheartening sometimes to look at what's happening with wildlife. All we hear about is stats about their just numbers going further and further down. But I try to find hope in, like, thinking back to Yellowstone. There was a time when we had 130 bears in Yellowstone. They had to kill so many from those dump sites. And now look at it. The population is over 1,000 in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem. So I just try to just remind myself that, there is hope if conservation groups and even just each one of us individually that care about these communities can do that. And I've seen, I've gone into one community that was at ground zero, and just little by little, we just got to hold that hope, because if it's not going to be us, then who could it be? But I do find hope in that. And yeah, thanks for sharing that.
I've got to do more of that. Good for you.
Thanks, Bob. Marley, you'll get the last question.
Well, I don't have a question. I just wanted to thank you for all that you do. You're right. We hear, sometimes it's very depressing when we think about what's happening with wildlife and bears and other wildlife too. And sometimes it's hard to find an inspiring story, but what you're doing is really inspiring because it's working. And thank you for the commitment that you have on top of your full-time job to continue to do this and to make the world a better place for the bears that we all love.
Marley,
that means a lot.
Marley just said that better than I ever could. thank you, Ranger Kim, for doing what you do. Thank you for talking to us about what you do. Part of what we talk about a lot is how to take what we think about in this book club and bring it out to the broader world. And I think you've given us a lot to do with that today. Also, since you like to read every book you can find about bears, you are welcome to join us every other Saturday.
I was going to ask you.
I'll add you to the mailing list.
Please do. I would love that.
We start next week with Douglas Chadwick's 4/5 of Grizzly. So I will add you to the list. You're welcome to join anytime. We are going to transition to informal conversation. We're just going to talk about bears for half an hour or so. You're welcome to join us. But if you don't want to stay, and for anybody else who needs to leave, let's give a big thank you to Ranger Kim for an inspiring and informative conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Stacy, so much. And since I guess I'm a part of the book club, I'll love to stay on and just listen to bear conversations, because that's what I do on my time, whether I'm off or working. So thanks for that. And just one last thing, I'll share my contact information with anyone. Do not hesitate ever to reach out or pass my information out wide and far. If you hear somebody saying, what can I do in my area? I want to talk to, you can give my information out all day long. I do not mind. Again, it's something I'm so passionate about. So thank you again for everyone. And I'll just listen in.
Okay, cool. I am going to stop recording.